Okay, let's see. Okay, good evening, everybody. Thanks again for listening. Sorry about that. I always try to get everything situated before we begin. I want to make sure the sound's working. So I want to make sure my mic is working and that my speaker is at a volume that's appropriate for you all to hear. Again, good evening. Happy Tuesday, everybody. It's the 16th of February, and this is another edition of the Beauty in Us Radio right here on Awesome God Radio. I am your host, Nelson E. Brown, and we are going to jump right into tonight's discussion. But before we begin, I want to start off with a couple of announcements. I want to let you guys know that, we are almost, September, November, December, January, February. We are almost 5 months in to the Beauty in Us Radio. I want to thank you guys again for your continued support and encouragement. I want to let you guys know that I feel like the beginning of 2021 is going by extremely quickly. I mean, we're already in the middle of February. Next thing you know, it'll be March, and then we're just going to continue on through the year. And the topic tonight that I wanted to talk about was about affirmative action. And we all know that, it's still Black History Month. All month long, we're celebrating Black History Month, and we are celebrating, the men and women, from our community, the Black community more specifically. We're celebrating them and their lives and the legacies that they've left behind for our generations. So I think that it's really important to talk about Shirley Chisholm and Thurgood Marshall, the late Shirley Chisholm and Thurgood Marshall. I think that it's really, really beneficial to talk about those two when we have a conversation about affirmative action, because it plays a role into everything we do, not just in the workforce, but it plays a role. It factors into how we see others and how we see people who don't look like us, how we view them, how we portray them, and just our views about them. So I think that when we talk about affirmative action, there are many different dimensions that we have to dive into. But before we jump right into those topics, when we talk about those two, I want to share an article with you guys that I read in my class. As you guys know, I'm a sociology major. I'm a sociology student at UMBC. And as a sociology student, we have to read and do a lot of research. So it's a lot of reading, writing, and research. So there was an article that we were assigned for our class this past week. It was about affirmative action, and I wanted to share that article with you guys tonight. And it puts a different spin on things because it makes me look at things from another perspective as a young man of color and as a Black man. This article, it was by ideas.time.com. It was written by Sally Cohn in 2013 on June 17th. It's called Affirmative Action Has Helped White Women More Than Anyone. So this is the article that I read and that I reported about and did an audio recording for one of my courses last week. So it really, really stuck out to me. It was about a young lady named Abigail Fisher who felt as though she was being discriminated against because she was a Caucasian female applying for a college and university. But I'm going to read a little bit of the article so you guys can get a better understanding of what it means and why this article stood out to me. It says, in the coming days, the U.S. Supreme Court, and again, this was from 2013. In the coming days, the U.S. Supreme Court is expected to rule in a potentially landmark, case on the constitutionality of affirmative action. The original lawsuit was filed on behalf of Abigail Fisher, a woman who claims that she was denied admission to the University of Texas because she is white. But study after study shows that affirmative action helps white women as much or even more than it helps men and women of color. Ironically, Fisher is exactly the kind of person affirmative action helps the most in America today. Originally, women weren't even included in the legislation attempting to level the playing field in education and employment. Again, this is from our article. This was the article about affirmative action that I shared with you guys. Again, this was an article that I read in my class and that I provided feedback about with my other classmates. So it's really, really good, but I'll continue. It says originally women weren't even included in legislation attempting to level the playing field in education and employment. The first affirmative action measure in America was an executive order signed by President Kennedy in 1961, requiring that federal contractors take affirmative action to ensure that applicants are employed and employees are treated during employment without regard to their race, creed, color, or national origin. In 1967, President Johnson amended this, and a subsequent measure included sex, recognizing that women also faced many discriminatory barriers and hurdles to equal opportunity. Meanwhile, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 only included sex in the list of prohibited forms of discrimination because conservative opponents, of the legislation hoped that including it would sway moderate members of Congress to withdraw their support for the bill. Still, in a nation where white women and black people were once considered property, not allowed to own property themselves and not allowed to vote, it was clear to all those who were seeking fairness and opportunity that both groups faced monumental obstacles. While people of color, individually and groups, have helped by affirmative action in recent years and subsequent years, data and studies suggest women, white women in particular, have benefited disproportionately. According to one study in 1995, 6 million women, the majority of whom were white, had jobs they wouldn't have otherwise held but for affirmative action. Another study shows that women made greater gains in employment at companies that do business with the federal government, which are therefore subject to federal affirmative action requirements, than in other companies, with female employment rising 15.2% at federal contractors, but only 2.2% elsewhere. And the women working for federal contractor companies also held higher positions and were paid better. Even in the private sector, the advancements of white women eclipse those of people of color. After IBM established its own affirmative action program, the numbers of women in management positions more than tripled in less than 10 years. Data from subsequent years show that the number of executives of color at IBM also grew, but not nearly at the same rate. So I'm going to pause right there for a second and then piggyback on some of the things that we learned, from that article. Again, this is an article. We're talking about affirmative action right now, and I just read an article by a lady named Sally Combe. It was written on June 17th, 2013, and it was about a young lady named Abigail Fisher, a young Caucasian female who filed a lawsuit because of the college didn't accept her, and she felt as though her race factored into the reason why they did not accept her, and she felt as though she was being discriminated against. And it had me thinking, like when I first read this article and when I talked about it with my classmates, I thought about affirmative action, and I also thought about many of the agencies that we have now in place, many of the provisions that we have in place now in the workforce, like job protected activities, such as the Family Medical Leave Act, and paid sick leave, unpaid leave, and all that stuff. We have a lot of provisions in place now. We have the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. We have locally and throughout our state, the state of Maryland, we have the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. We have all of these agencies, and we have all of these people that are supposed to represent us when we feel as though we're not being treated fairly, from an educational standpoint and from a professional standpoint, when we are trying to go for opportunities, or when we're trying to move ahead or advance in the workplace or in the field of education. So I think that it's really, really imperative for us to understand this, because again, we don't really hear a lot about Caucasian females in Abigail's case, Abigail Fisher's case, being discriminated against. We often think about people of color being discriminated against, or just women in general being discriminated against. But when I first read this article, and when I shared this article with my classmates in that audio recording, it made me think about things a little differently. As a young man of color, and as a black male, as a young person, I was able to think about that differently. And I also looked up some stats from the EEOC from 2019. from the 2019 fiscal year. It's called Enforcement and Litigation Data. And it keeps track of all of the workplace discrimination complaints that have been filed and all of the charges of discrimination that have been filed. And it just covers a wide variety of things. When we talk about, affirmative action, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace, and even in the field of education, but in this case, the workplace. And I'm going to read some of the stats with you guys so that you guys can get a better understanding of how many people actually do suffer in silence in the workplace, and also how many claims, how many cases, and how many complaints get filed, and how many charges of discrimination get filed each year. So this is just an example. It says the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission today released detailed breakdowns for the 72,675 charges of workplace discrimination the agency received in fiscal year 2019. The comprehensive enforcement and litigation statistics for the fiscal year 2019, which ended September 30th, 2019, are posted on the agency's website, which also includes the detailed breakdown of charges by state. So this data, it says that it shows that retaliation continued to be the most frequently filed charge filed with the agency, followed by disability, race, and sex. The agency also received 7,000, and this is in the fiscal year 2019, let's be mindful of that, 7,514 sexual harassment charges, 10.3% of all charges, and a 1.2% decrease from the fiscal year 2018. Specifically, the charge numbers show the following breakdowns by bases alleged in descending order. Retaliation, 39,110, 53.8% of all charges filed. Disability, 24,238, which is 33.4%. Race, 23,976, 33.0%. Sex, 23,532, 32.4%. Age, 15,573, and that's 21.4%. And again, I'm just going to keep in mind that these are the amount of charges of discrimination that are filed each year. This is just an example. This is from the fiscal year 2019, but I'm sure it's much higher. I know it because, again, workplace discrimination still exists in the workplace. And even though that, affirmative action has created more diversity and inclusion, I still feel like we still have a long way to go when we talk about this. But when we talk about this, we also have to remember the other stats, like the rest of the stats, like the national origin, 7,009, which stands for 9.6%. Color, 3,415, 4.7%. Religion, 2,725, that's 3.7%. The Equal Pay Act, again, the Equal Pay Act, that's to ensure that pay discrimination does not exist between men and women in the workplace. And it also ensures that, you cannot be penalized or retaliated against for disclosing your salary to one of your colleagues or one of your fellow employers. That's what the Equal Pay Act stands for. You can't be retaliated against, but those figures, that figure of 1,117, that represents the amount of charges that have been filed by employees who may have been retaliated against because they discussed their salary or made disputes about their salary with another coworker or with someone, in their chain of command. And genetic information is last. That's 209 charges, and that accounts for 0.3%. So these percentages add up to more than 100% because some charges allege multiple bases. It says that the EEOC advances opportunity in the workplace by enforcing federal laws prohibiting employment discrimination. More information is also available, of course, at the EEOC website at www.eeoc.gov. And they encourage you to stay connected with the latest news about, the cases that have been filed or the charges of discrimination that have been filed by giving you the option to subscribe to their emails. And I just think that I just find it so interesting because when I was reading these stats and when I was reading these articles, I really didn't think that, I guess because it never crossed my mind how many people actually are victims of discrimination in some way or another or in some capacity in the workplace. When we talk about iconic figures like Shirley Chisholm and Thurgood Marshall, we could talk about how they paved the way for many African Americans now. And when we talk about Shirley Chisholm, we can also think about how much she accomplished in her career, as a civil rights activist, as a congresswoman, and as an educator. She accomplished a lot. And I'm going to read a little bit about her bio, so we can all get a better understanding of who Shirley Chisholm is. And if you don't know who she is, I feel like you are kind of like lost. I guess you're just hiding under a rock somewhere, because she's so iconic, and she's like a shiro, in the African American community. But I'm gonna read a little bit about her, so you guys can learn a little bit more about her. Excuse me. It says that, and this is her biography. It says that Shirley Chisholm, and this was written by biography.com on February 28th, 2019. 2018. It was only a couple years ago. It says, Shirley Chisholm became the first African-American congresswoman in 1968. 4 years later, she became the first major party Black candidate to make a bid for the U.S. presidency. Again, 4 years later, she became the first major party Black candidate to make a bid for the U.S. presidency. Shirley Chisholm is best known for becoming the first Black congresswoman in 1968. She represented New York State in the U.S. House of Representatives for 7 terms. So if you think of them times 4, that's 28. So she served in Congress as a member of the House of Representatives for 7 times 4, and that's 28. So she served in that capacity for 28 years. She went on to run for the 1972 Democratic nomination for the presidency, becoming the first major party African-American candidate to do so. Throughout her political career, she fought for educational opportunities and social justice. She left Congress in 1983 to teach. She passed away in Florida in 2005. And she served as a director of the Hamilton-Madison Child Care Center from 1953 to 1959, and as an educational consultant for New York City's Bureau of Child Welfare from 1959 to 1964. And in 1968, when she made history, becoming the first African-American congresswoman, she was assigned to the House Forestry Committee, and she was also placed in the Veterans Affairs Committee. And she eventually graduated to the Education and Labor Commission. And she became one of the founding members of the Congressional Black Caucus in 1969 and championed minority education and employment opportunities throughout her tenure in Congress. And she went on again to make history, like I said before, in 1972, when she became the first African American and the second woman to make a bid for the U.S. presidency with a major party when she ran for the Democratic nomination in 1972. And in her announcing bid, when she announced her campaign for president, she said, "I am not the candidate of Black America, although I am Black and proud. I am not the candidate of the women's movement of this country, although I am a woman and I am equally proud of that. I am the candidate of the people, and my presence before you now symbolizes a new era in American political history." Although she ran a spirited campaign, she was unable to, win the election. But she did garner a lot of support from a lot of inspirational Black leaders. And she was able to accomplish so much even after her career in Congress. She wrote a couple of books, and after she left in 1983, she taught at Mount Holyoke College, and she was popular, in that capacity. And she was also a co-founder of the Unity Democratic Club in Brooklyn, and she was one of the early members of the National Organization for Women, and she was also active in the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which is also called the NAACP. She was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame in 1993. So let's just pause for a second and let's just think about diversity and inclusion when we talk about the workforce, and when we talk about, just making the workplace comfortable for everyone of all backgrounds, of all races, both genders, and for everyone. I think that affirmative action, like I said, we have come a long way, but we still have ways to go. I was also looking at another YouTube clip of our former senator, our retired senator, Barbara Mikulski, where she talked about the Paycheck Fairness Act. And she also talked about the Equal Pay Act, where it prevents pay discrimination in the workplace. And I know that for the people who work, for all of my listeners who may work, in the Office of Human Resources, or they may work in that capacity, they know exactly what this looks like. Because I think that, because I know, because a lot of people have told me, but a lot of the management level positions in the workforce get very political when you move up the ladder professionally, and when you go through the chain of command. It can get a little dicey because of the hiring practices that take place, and just because of the way that a lot of companies do business. They throw politics in there, and it just gets really, really disgusting sometimes. So when we talk about affirmative action, and when we talk about human resources and the policies that they implement, and when we think about the Equal Pay Act, which prevents women pay discrimination to exist between men and women, and it also prevents another employee from getting fired or retaliated against for bringing up salary disputes with their employer, or when they ask another colleague about that. And when we talk about the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act of 2009, we can also think about affirmative action in that way, because according to the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act of 2009, this act amends the Title IX of Civil Rights Act of 1964, and it reinforces that equal pay for equal work concept that a lot of companies implement in the Office of Human Resources, to make sure that pay discrimination does not exist between men and women, and also to make sure that men and women are paid equally and fairly for the same jobs, and because of their qualifications, the same exact qualifications. And Lilly Ledbetter, in this case, from that act, the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act of 2009, she was a production supervisor at a Goodyear tire plant in Alabama, and she filed an equal pay lawsuit regarding pay discrimination under the Title IX of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and also with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission 6 months before her early retirement in 1998. Initially, the jury found for Ms. Ledbetter, they awarded her $3 million, and it was reduced to $300,000 due to a Title IX damage cap, it says. What that means, I really don't know. I'm just going along with the research, and I've just been collecting a lot of data. But to make a long story short, she made disputes about the pay that she was receiving. She found out that a lot of her male colleagues were making more money than her, and they were being paid more than her, even though they had the same qualifications and the same level of education. They had the same skills and the same knowledge. They were all doing the same job. So again, when we talk about affirmative action, we can just use that as an example of what really goes on in the workplace. And for people who are in management level positions out there, do you really, really think that it's necessary to use ideology or political strategies in order to promote people or to hire people or to conduct business? Because I personally believe that it's all about fairness, and I think that when it gets really political, the unfairness really, really starts to display itself. So for all of my people in management level positions in the workforce, or if you're a manager of some sort or in any capacity at your company, do you oppose those strategies when you're trying to hire people or when you're trying to recruit people for certain positions? Or if you work in HR or in the Office of Human Resources, do you look at these cases, or do any of the employees at your company come to you and complain about anything, whether it's about discrimination, their rights being violated, them not being paid equally compared to other people? Do you actually take the time out to listen to these? Because sometimes when people are in executive level positions, or when they're in positions of leadership, they don't take a lot of these claims seriously. And I think that every claim should be taken seriously. Every allegation should be taken seriously. And it's not something for you to just gloss over, because it happens way too often for us to ignore. So when we talk about the roles and the responsibilities of equal employment officers. Especially in places like I said, our agency here, our civil rights agency, the Maryland Commission of Civil Rights, or at the national level with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And when we talk about the life of Shirley Chisholm as a congresswoman and as an educator, when we think about affirmative action, we have to think about the fact that we all work, we all go to school, and we all have the same goal in mind. We are all standing on purpose, and our purpose for the workforce and our purpose for attending school is to learn and to grow, to get a good education, to advance in the workplace so that we can be in a better position financially and intellectually to take care of ourselves and to take care of our families, and so that we can just have a healthy life and a happy life. But what happens when these barriers come into play? What happens when these discriminatory practices that exist in the workplace, what happens when they interfere with our dreams and what we want? Oftentimes people may use that, to hold us back from opportunities. Are you one of those people, or do you think it's unfair? Because I know a lot of people, they use their positions, unfortunately, to hold people back, especially when they know that they deserve the next promotion or the next grade or the next step into their career. So again, as an equal employment officer, it's a huge responsibility because you're looking at these cases and you're trying to figure out the best solutions, and you have to handle disputes, and you have to demonstrate a level of compassion, care, and courtesy to that victim. Again, whether it's a sexual harassment case, whether it's a racial discrimination, sexism in the workplace, whether it's pay discrimination or retaliation or whatever the case may be, every claim should be taken seriously. And I think that the work that Shirley Chisholm has done in order to promote equality, not just for the Black community, but for communities of color in general, I think that should be recognized and that should be outlined, forever. And that's why I think that she's a hero in the Black community and the African American community, because she was a great role model and representation of what it meant to be a woman, be a minority, and to actually work hard and just leave her legacy and leave that footprint and that stepping stone, for women and little girls to look up to. But as an equal employment officer, you deal with these cases all the time. It's definitely something that you can't just take for granted, because you are responsible for a lot of people. You are responsible for examining cases thoroughly and strategically to figure out what the best solutions are so that that victim can be the safest, can feel safe and in the workplace. And oftentimes, we often think about it, and the fear holds us back if we're victims of discrimination or of retaliation of some sort because we chose to stand up for ourselves or because we chose to stick up for somebody else when we knew something was wrong. Sometimes, we get penalized for it, or people turn against us for it. They always say, if you see something, say something. And that's not always the case with everybody. Some people always say, oh, I don't want to be involved, or some people act as bystanders in that situation. But when we talk about affirmative action, when we talk about discrimination, when we talk about equal pay for equal work, employment opportunities, everything like that, it all boils down to fairness and equality. And again, if we are all put in that situation, we all want someone to advocate for us. We all want that chance. We all want someone to stand up for us when we feel helpless. And oftentimes, victims of discrimination or harassment or any of these obstacles, oftentimes people don't like to share. People don't like to speak up because of fear. They feel powerless, especially in a situation where they feel like their position, means nothing compared to someone who has this title and that title. They're the deputy director of this. They're the director of this. They're the commissioner of this. A lot of people get stuck on titles, and they think that sometimes you're more prone to doing whatever you want to do, and that's not the case, because that position of leadership is not meant for that. It's meant for you to make a difference. It's not meant for you to be mean and nasty to other people. It's meant for you to make a difference. And some of the requirements, the roles and responsibilities that go along with being an equal employment officer is that you are responsible, not like I said with a lot of cases, but conducting outreach and education about equal employment and non-discrimination requirements that are consistent with the laws that have been implemented by your prospective state, and also the EEO officers and those staff members. They have to continue to go to trainings, and they have to continue to just learn about all of the ways in which they can make the workplace more inclusive for everyone, so that everyone has a fair chance to succeed in the workplace and feel comfortable in their place of employment without feeling, bullied or harassed or, victims, again, of retaliation. So these are all examples. But when we talk about another prominent figure named Thurgood Marshall, we can also think about the ways in which, our civil rights and just the whole concept of promoting equality, racial equality during that movement. We can definitely think about Thurgood Marshall, because he was the very first African American Supreme Court justice, and he played a huge role in promoting racial equality, especially during that civil rights era. And as an attorney, and I'm reading from history.com, it says, as a practicing attorney, Marshall argued a record-breaking 32 cases before the Supreme Court, and he won 29 of them. And he represented and won more cases before the High Court than any other person. And during his 24-year term, according to the history.com, according to his 24-year term as Supreme Court Justice, Marshall's passionate support for individuals and civil rights guided his policies and decisions. And a lot of people who are historians, they view him as a very influential figure in shaping a lot of our social policies and laws that have been implemented for years that protect minorities. And, he was born right here in Baltimore, Maryland in 1902 on July 2nd. And he finished high school in 1925. He went to Lincoln University in PA and got married and everything. And then he applied to the University of Maryland School of Law. But he faced discrimination once again, because of the color of his skin, because he was Black. But he decided to attend Howard University Law School instead. And he graduated with his law degree in 1933 and was ranked first in his class. And after he graduated from Howard University School of Law, he opened up his private practice law firm in Baltimore. And he had a prominent career as a lawyer, again, throughout the 1940s and 1950s. He was recognized as one of the top attorneys in the United States. He won 29 out of the 32 cases he argued before the Supreme Court. And shortly after his legal career, he became a staff lawyer for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which is also known as the NAACP. And he was eventually named as the chief of the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund. And his first major court his first major court victory came in Murray versus Pearson, when he, alongside his colleagues and his mentors, they successfully sued the University of Maryland for denying a Black applicant admission to its law school because of his race. And this happened in 1935. And here are a list of other cases that he's argued and that he's won that are considered to be very notable. It says one from 1940 is Chambers versus Florida, where he successfully defended 4 convicted Black men who were coerced by police into confessing to murder. Smith versus Allwright in 1944, where the Supreme Court overturned a Texas state law that authorized the use of whites-only primary elections in certain southern states. Shirley versus Kramer in 1948, where the Supreme Court struck down the legality of racially restrictive housing covenants. Sweat versus Painter in 1950. In this case, challenged the separate but equal doctrine of racial segregation that was put in place in the Plessy versus Ferguson case from 1896, and it set the stage for future legislation. And the court sided with Heman Marion Sweat, excuse me, and he was a black man who was denied admission to the University of Texas School of Law because of his race, even though the option of separate but equal was in place. And also the Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka. And this was a landmark case in 1954. And this is the one that I learned about a lot in school because we learned about Black history in school, and Thurgood Marshall was one of the prominent figures that we learned about, while I was growing up in school and learning about it. In this case, this landmark case, and it was considered one of his greatest victories as a civil rights attorney. And it was about a group of Black parents whose children were required to attend segregated schools. And they filed a class action lawsuit. And the Supreme Court unanimously ruled that separate educational facilities were inherently unequal. So it just goes to show you that affirmative action is a part of how we view ourselves, how we view our colleagues, how we view everyone else in the workplace, and just in professional settings or in school settings, and just everywhere we go. So I think that when we talk about affirmative action, we have to continue to do our best to listen and to learn, and to not try our best not to just label and use that implicit bias that we use in order to determine whether or not people are what we think they are, or whether or not they're worthy or not of opportunities. I mean, all that shouldn't matter, because at the end of the day, we all have a purpose. We all have that same mission, and we are all on the same journey in terms of just wanting to move forward and wanting to advance. There's deep down inside, we want more, and we want to be more. So again, it's just really, it's really something that I want all of you guys to think about, because it's something that should not be taken lightly. I think about equal employment and opportunities, and I often think about many of the people who suffer in the workplace because of that fear, that underlying fear that they may have about letting their first line managers or people throughout their chain of command know what they're going through. I mean, you really don't know what people are going through nowadays. I mean, even when people come to work every day and you see them for 8 hours a day, maybe 5 days a week, and for some people on the weekend, you may see them, but you never know what people are going through. And I think that as a manager or as an executive or someone in a leadership position, I think that it's really, really good to have that rapport with your colleagues so that they can feel safe and comfortable with you. And it gives them more incentives, to work harder and to be more. I think that, when you're a manager or when you're in a management level position, it's not a place for you to use your position to destroy everybody else's career or their livelihood, or to put them in jeopardy. It's an opportunity for you to help others and to watch them succeed, even if they surpass you, which is something that you should not be jealous about. But again, when we talk about affirmative action, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, and when we talk about Shirley Chisholm and the work that Thurgood Marshall did, the work that both of them did, it all boils down to the fact that, again, we all want to feel included. We all want that sense of belonging. And, we make friends in the workplace. We don't get along with everyone, but, that level of respect is something that should be earned, and it should be deserved, because, we all, at the end of the day, financially, we all need jobs. We all need food. We all need shelter. We all need these things. And it's not going to be beneficial for anybody when, nobody has a job, because they decide to do something cutthroat, mean, and nasty to someone else. But again, I think that whoever files lawsuits and stands up for themselves in terms of fighting against discrimination or retaliation, I think that a lot of people like that, they demonstrate a lot of character, integrity, and strength, because not a lot of people, everybody can't do that. Just think about it. You think about how many people are scared. Think about how many people who come to work every day, or people, or little children who may go to school every day. Think about the people who are not even eating every day, and they may just tolerate verbal abuse from their workplace, or from their manager, or from their colleagues. Think about the people who aren't even eating every day, or people who are struggling trying to make it, and they just come to work every day, and they may not feel like they belong, but they just take it because, and they just tolerate it because they feel like they have no other choice, and they don't know how to stand up for themselves. And that's why it's up to us to not be bystanders. It's up to us to figure out what's going on and to do what we know is right in order to, uphold, the morals and the ethics. When we talk about the Equal Pay Act, and when we talk about, again, affirmative action, and when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we have to think about just the ways in which that may appear, in front of our eyes. I told you guys about the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. That's our Fair Employment Practices Agency right here in Maryland. But again, on the federal level, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is there. So I think that I'm going to see if I can put in some links to Shirley Chisholm's speech. I think that her speech is very, very powerful. I listened to her speech several times, and just like how much confidence she has. It just blew me away. So I'm going to see after this show, excuse me, if I can put on my page a link for you guys to listen to her speech, so that you guys can just listen to her voice and to just look at her stride of confidence. And I'm also going to see if I can give you guys links to many of the sources that you may need, or that someone else may need, or someone else who may need them, in case you feel as though you want to file a discrimination lawsuit or a complaint against your employer because you feel as though you're not being treated fairly, or you feel like you're being discriminated against, or you feel like you're being bullied or retaliated against or harassed because you may have engaged in a job protected activity, or you may have been standing up for your rights. And again, that affirmative action piece, that diversity and inclusion piece, you may want to stand up for that, but you may not know how to do it. And that's what the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights does. It enforces all of the state laws and all of the rules, not just in employment, but also in housing disputes and in housing complaints. And these resources are so beneficial for everyone who wants to be involved and who wants to stand up for what is right. Because just think about how many people, cut corners with the way they do business nowadays. Think about the ways in which people may not treat people fairly because of the color of their skin, or because of their gender, or because of their status, so to speak. Not everybody in leadership positions takes everybody seriously, and even though that's not fair and that should not be the case, it is. You can often find yourself in that predicament. And some of the examples of some of the services that the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights provides is case processing. So when you believe you've been a victim of unlawful discrimination, that's where you turn and you file a complaint, and then it goes to their intake unit. And if your complaint meets the criteria of what their standards are, and once it is filed within that time frame, your complaint, I should say, will fall under their jurisdiction, and then a charge of discrimination will be issued. And then you get assigned an investigator, and it goes through the investigation process. And after that, they kind of guide you. The civil rights officers and the intake officers, they guide you along the way. They tell you about the entire process. So, you have a lot of assistance, and you do have the help that you need so that you won't feel like nobody's on your team. And again, your civil rights are personal. Your civil rights are personal. And when we talk about money or paid discrimination that exists in the workplace, that's personal too, because it affects not only the amount of money that you take home, which is also considered to be your net pay, but it also affects you in the long run when you want to retire or claim your Social Security benefits, or you want to save, and if you want to invest into your future, for your family, for your kids, or for people that you truly love and care about, that affects you as well. So we have to look at the big picture when we talk about this. Some of the other services that they have include, the Office of the General Counsel, which is where all of the legal aspects of these matters are handled by their office, and that includes litigation. And they also provide a lot of legal opinions and advice to not only their staff, but they also respond to a lot of legal inquiries to the public, and they also do a lot of education and outreach. So they participate in a lot of programs that offer workshops and seminars to agencies, businesses, and community organizations throughout the state of Maryland. And these programs are supposed to educate the public on the matters that affect the equal access and opportunities under, state law, Maryland state law. So the state contracts, public accommodations, fair housing, fair employment practices. I mean, they teach you all of what you want to learn. And you should feel comfortable with the fact that, once you do file your charges of discrimination, when you file that complaint first, because again, you have to file a complaint first, and then you have to file charges. And then that's when the investigation continues. And then it moves forward. You may want to go to court. You may not want to go to court. But again, they guide you along the way. So the Maryland Commission of Civil Rights and the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, those are just two examples, two partners, federal and state partners, that can help you if you feel as though you've been discriminated against. And I may leave a link for you guys just so you can use it as a future reference, just in case you feel as though there may be a point in your life where you may want to file a complaint or charges of discrimination against your employer because you feel as though you're not being treated fairly, or because you feel like you're being discriminated against and no one else is helping you, because many people, feel that way. So you're not alone, in that circumstance. But I may put that in the show notes, later on this evening. I'll think about how to do that. But when we talk about, again, Thurgood Marshall and Shirley Chisholm, they had successful careers. They had admirable careers. She was a congressman and educator. He was a lawyer, and then he became the first African-American judge. And, that's something that is irreplaceable. You can never replace the first. So, again, the fact that they made history definitely says a lot. And again, when you file lawsuits and when you file charges of discrimination, or when you're seeking relief for anything, for any discriminatory practice that may have been used against you in the workplace, or if affirmative action was not implemented properly to ensure that you were protected, the emotional distress and the pain and suffering that you experience behind it definitely speaks volume, and it's something that no one else can really understand, because everyone has not gone through that, so you can't speak about what you don't know. But again, you have to just really, really sit back and think about, the way you have to think about the way you do your work, the way you handle your business. I hope this broadcast has really given you guys a chance to just think about yourselves And I hope and pray that this broadcast has given you a different twist and a different perspective on the workplace, for the better, of course, because the discriminatory practices that take place in the workplace, especially in the levels of management and in leadership, I think that it just has to stop. Because again, we all have the ability to move forward. We all have the ability to advance in some way or another. We are all gifted and talented, in some area. And some of us may not have talents in one area, but we may have talents and skills in another. So I just encourage you all to just think about this, because we can all help each other move forward. We can act as mentors for one another, and we can hold each other accountable, in our careers and in the workplace. Just think about our colleagues, think about your friends who may be struggling, and you want to be there to help them. And that's what affirmative action is all about, diversity and inclusion. But it's also about, paving the way for opportunities for people who don't just look like you, but, again, being inclusive, being diverse, all races, all nationalities, all cultures, just having an open mind and an open perspective on things. I hope that this broadcast has really, really blessed you all. Because, again, a lot of us don't like to reveal that, but levels of prejudice still exist in the workplace and throughout our world. Racism is still prevalent nowadays. It's been exacerbated by the previous administration in some way or another. Because the pandemic hasn't revealed that. It was always there. But now it's our chance to clean that up. It's our responsibility to clean that up. And it's also our responsibility to clean that up so that the next generation doesn't have to experience this. Our next generation won't have to remember this. But again, racism and levels of prejudice that was exacerbated in recent years because of the leadership and because of the implicit bias and because of the stereotypes. Affirmative action and diversity and inclusion should have been factored into a lot of the decisions that were made. Fairness and equality is what really mattered. Fairness and equality is what really mattered. So as I wrap up the show tonight, I want to encourage you all to tune in to next week's show. That is going to be on the 23rd of February from 6 to 7 p.m. I am going to think about who to talk about next. I'm going to go through my notes, and I'm going to do some research like I usually do, and I'm going to think about who to speak about next and the topic for next week's show. Feel free to leave your ideas down in your comments section of the post. And again, I will see if I can upload the links to not only Shirley Chisholm's speech, but also to the resources that with the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I want you all to have that. And even if you've never experienced it yourself, even if you don't need it for yourself, it's a good resource to use for someone else who may need it, someone else who may be fearful of standing up for themselves, because of the discriminatory practices in the workplace that may have been used against them. They may not know how to defend themselves. They may not know how to stick up for themselves. They may not know how to, I wouldn't even say confront, but just stand up for what is right against someone in a higher power from a professional setting. So again, I think that it'll be beneficial for me to just leave these in the show notes, the links to all of the services to the Maryland Commission of Civil Rights authors, as well as the EEOC, and probably, again, the YouTube clip of Shirley Chisholm's speech. It's really, really profound. It's really powerful. And I hope that you all really, really enjoy your evening. Wash your hands. Remember to stay 6 feet apart. Don't be nasty. Wash your hands. Again, wear your mask. You don't have to be all up on each other. You just stay cool. We are going to make it through this. It's really been a lot. We're coming up on a year going through this pandemic. So, we can all do this. We can move through this. This will be in the rearview mirror soon. We'll all get back to normal eventually, but we all have to do our part in order to stay safe. And I really hope that the pandemic has really revealed positive things, and it's helped us look at our lives differently. I really hope it's done that for me. So I hope it does the same for you. And even with all of what I'm going through, being jobless, battling health-related issues, and just now the passing of my dad, and just one traumatizing event after another is just something that I'm moving through. And I'm so glad that I have a great support system and a great therapist who, lets me vent and just release all of my frustration and all of my stress, all of my anxiety, and just my sadness. Just relieving that is definitely good for me. So again, thank you guys for tuning in. As always, I appreciate you. Make an appointment to meet me back here at 6 p.m. on the 23rd of February. This is the Beauty in Us Radio right here on Awesome God Radio. I am your host, Nelson E. Brown, and I will see you next time. So again, I'm just be on the lookout for more content coming your way. See you guys later.